I'm very honored to read to you the sermon that our Reverend Jeffrey M. Halenza wrote for you for this time of Christ the King Sunday. And you hear his voice. I hope I can do it justice. You'll hear his intonations. It happened 47 years ago this past September, but it could have been just last month. So vivid the memory of it is. I was in New York City for a mission developers training session. All the mission developers from across the country who were starting new congregations that fall gathered, along with our field supervisors, to undergo 3 days of training to prepare us to begin our work. The last time I'd been in New York was 10 years before, and I couldn't believe how much it had changed. Broadway had gone from being a street, which was great fun, to walk at night, glittering as it did with the theater signs all lit up and the crowds of people all dressed up for a night on the town, to a street you didn't even want to walk down in broad daylight. So filled it was with addicts and prostitutes and peep show pitchmen. You couldn't walk 3 steps without somebody accosting you with obscene photographs, promising the real thing if only you would step inside for the show. And the contrast, the stunning, horrifying contrast of the city. You turn the corner and go from people streaming into the sidewalks from the subway, forming a sea of people on their way to work, to a side street nearly empty, except for winos lying on the sidewalk, and the stench of it would almost knock you down. But the others with you on the street, not seeming to notice, walking by and around the bums and the derelicts without stopping or looking. You got the feeling that that's how you survived in that city, not noticing, not paying attention to anyone or anything. Just keep moving amidst the sea of people that move down the sidewalks in great waves. I love cities. I love downtown areas. But this city was intimidating, frightening. One evening I went to dinner with a field supervisor from Chicago. Rather, we went to get a sandwich, since the sandwich was all I could get for under $20, it seemed. The field supervisor was wearing his clerical collar while I had on a sports coat. As we were walking back to the hotel near Penn Station, a rather well-dressed man approached us. He thought my companion, dressed as he was in clerical collar, was a Catholic priest because he addressed him as Father. And what he said was this: "Father, I need help. I went out drinking after work with some friends and we played some cards, and well, the truth is I lost all my money, and now I don't even have subway fare to go home. I can't call my wife, she'd kill me. This isn't the first time this has happened. Would you give me a couple of dollars so I can get home?" And my first reaction was to step back, to try to get out of the situation, because something didn't seem right. And I was afraid that it was more than a con game that was going on, that something dangerous was about to happen. But my companion did not step back. He simply reached for his wallet, gave the man $2, and told him to go straight home to his family. And that's when it happened. The man gave the $2 back and said, "I really don't need it, Father. It was a test. You see, I'm Jewish, and all I hear is how Christians love their fellow men and are always helping their neighbor and the stranger." Frankly, I got sick to death of always hearing that, so I thought I'd test it. I just wanted to see if it was true what they say about Christians. Well, you passed the test. I guess it is true. Good night, and may God bless you. And before we knew it, he had disappeared into the darkness. And I was embarrassed, ashamed, really. And in my embarrassment and shame, I asked my companion, "Do you always do that?" He answered, "Yes, I'm afraid so. In Chicago, I always carry some extra money in case I'm approached on the street. My secretary gets mad at me because she thinks I let myself be taken advantage of." Maybe she's right. Still, I always try to respond with a little something. And I would like to say that It was the intimidating atmosphere of that city that caused me to react as I did. I would like to say that in a different city, under different circumstances, I would have responded differently. But that would not be the truth. The simple truth was that I was suspicious, quick to judge, afraid, and did not respond. And what haunts me to this day, what still makes me feel ashamed, is that if I had been alone, the man would have walked away, certain that Christians did not mean what they say, for I would have failed his test miserably. And Jesus said, when the Son of Man comes in his glory, he will separate people, one from the other, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will put the sheep at his right hand and the goats at the left. And what is it that makes for a goat? What is it that marks off the goats from the sheep? Then he will say to those at his left, I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me. Naked, and you did not give me clothing. Sick and in prison, and you did not visit me. That's what makes for a goat. That's the test. And 44 years ago, on a street in New York City, I acted like a real goat. Failed the test miserably. And that wasn't the first time or the last time either. All of my life, I have struggled with my goathood. What Jesus asked, according to that story of the sheep and the goats, we heard as our gospel reading, is simply that we be faithful, that we live out the gospel of kindness and compassion and mercy each day, in whatever way we can, wherever we are. That is what's so stunning about the story. Jesus doesn't ask that we change the world, that we solve all the world's problems, not even that we be effective. Nor does he ask what awards we have won, what influential or important people we have known. And he doesn't ask what denomination we belong to, what church we attend, what creeds we believe, not even if we accept the unaltered Augsburg Confession as a true statement of the Lutheran faith, or if we've memorized Luther's small catechism, or if we have been born again. He only asks that we be faithful. Do you feed the hungry? Did you clothe the naked? Did you welcome the stranger? Did you visit the prisoner, the sick? That is what he asks. And there's something else about the story that's equally stunning. Before it is a story about believers, it is a story about unbelievers, non-Christians, all the nations. That's why the unbelievers in the story are so astonished. They had no idea that in feeding the hungry or clothing the naked or welcoming the stranger, they were in fact putting themselves in relation to Christ and were being faithful and righteous. What the story tells us is that it's not finally our words or creeds or professions of faith that put us in relation to Christ, but doing the will of God as Jesus taught it. And as Jesus taught it, the will of God is that we feed and clothe and welcome and visit and care for those in need. And as believers, perhaps we can learn something from these unbelievers whom Christ welcomed to the joy of his kingdom. The unbelievers simply saw others as fellow human beings who were human to them, simply showing kindness and compassion to those who desperately needed a little kindness and compassion. And maybe that's much of the problem for believers today. It's become so hard for us to see others as human beings they are. It's so hard for us to see each other without all the labels and categories, without fear and suspicion. Then again, there are times when we don't see others at all, look right past them, right through them, as if they didn't even exist. And the ones we often don't even see are the ones whom Jesus calls the least. The ones who have no power or status or standing to speak of. The edges of life. The ones who are not considered big stories by the media, not rich or famous. Or maybe it's just that we get so lost in our own problems or worries that we don't or see them only as interruptions or burdens that we don't need or want. The dying words of a German poet were these: light, light, let there be light. A Spanish philosopher later reflected on these words and said, it's not more light we need, but more warmth. Warmth, warmth, more warmth. We die of cold, not of darkness. It is the night that it's not the night that kills, but the frost. And I would agree, it's more warmth that we need. There seems to be so little warmth and graciousness to life today, and if we're not careful, we ourselves can grow cold. Now today is Christ the King Sunday. Frankly, all I know about kings and kingdoms is what I read in the tabloid standing in line at the grocery store. But I don't think it's Prince William or Prince Harry that we're to have in mind today. To speak of Christ as King is to speak of what rules our hearts and our minds and actions, and chances are there are more days than we care to admit when it's not Christ's grace and mercy that rules us. Maybe I'm not the only one who feels like a goat some days, acts like a goat. Perhaps you also struggle with goathood, to leave your goathood behind. And if ever we are to leave our goathood behind, then it will have to do what rules our hearts and minds, what gives us eyes to see, and what guides our hands and feet, what thaws our hearts, what moves us to think of others, what opens our eyes to the pain of fellow human beings, what unclenches our hands and aims our feet in the direction Christ would have them go. A member of the congregation who often served at the Redeemer's soup kitchen told me about seeing a rather strange sight there one morning. He saw one of those he had served and come to know a bit, standing in the back of the room with his arms stretched out. He stood there like that for 5 minutes or more. The member finally asked one of the kitchen regulars, why in the world was the man standing like that? The person replied, oh, now and then he thinks he's Christ. And the truth, of course, is that he was Christ. He is Christ. What was truly surprising to those in our gospel reading whom Christ welcomed into the kingdom was that in serving the least, they were serving and seeing Christ himself. Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty, or a stranger, or naked, or sick, or in prison, they asked? And Jesus answered, just as you did it to one of the least of these, you did it to me. Christ is there in all hunger and thirst and need of a friend, and to do whatever we can is to be faithful to Christ. 47 years ago, on a street in New York City, Christ approached disguised as a Jewish businessman, and I was a real goat to him. And ever since that day, I will always try to give a little something to anyone who asks and not judge them, not worry if I'm being taken for a ride, because, well, you just never know. And because it's one small way of leaving my goathood behind.
Amen.